It started like any ordinary lunch rush at the bustling downtown diner. Orders flying in, plates clattering, and the hum of conversations blending with the sound of sizzling grills. Among the crowd, no one paid much attention to the older man sitting quietly in the corner booth. Dressed in simple jeans and a faded polo shirt, he looked like just another customer enjoying a quick bite. But what no one knew was that this man was far from ordinary. He was the CEO of the very company that owned the chain of restaurants, including this one. And today, he wasn't here for a meeting or a photo shoot. He was here undercover, hoping to see how his staff and customers truly interacted when no one knew who he was. As he sipped his coffee and casually observed the scene, his attention was suddenly drawn to a loud, sharp voice coming from a nearby table. A well-dressed man, red in the face with frustration, was angrily gesturing at a young waitress. She looked barely 20, clearly overwhelmed, and on the verge of tears. The CEO's eyes narrowed as the customer grew louder, complaining about his order being late. Before anyone could react, the man suddenly hurled a half-eaten plate of food directly at the waitress, hitting her apron and splattering food across the floor. The entire diner went silent. Customers stared in disbelief, some reaching for their phones, while others looked to the staff, unsure how to respond. The waitress stood frozen, cheeks flushed with embarrassment and eyes wide with shock. She mumbled an apology, even though it was clear the mistake hadn't been hers. The Undercover CEO remained seated, heart pounding. He hadn't come expecting to see anything like this. He'd wanted a raw glimpse into his business, but now he was witnessing something that went far beyond poor service or messy operations. This was a test, not just of the staff, but of himself. As the rude customer sat back smugly, unfazed by the scene he caused, the CEO quietly slid out of his booth. What happened next stunned everyone in the room. It was the kind of moment that would change not only the life of that young waitress, but the culture of the entire company. No one could have predicted what he was about to do. And as he stepped forward, all eyes turned to the man they thought was just another diner guest. But he wasn't just any guest. And what he said next left the room speechless. The man stepped forward slowly, his eyes locked on the customer who had just thrown the food. His face remained calm, but there was something in his expression that made even the loud man pause. The CEO didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply looked at the waitress, who was still trying to gather her breath, and then turned to the man at the table. "Is this how you usually treat people who are just doing their job?" he asked, his tone low but clear. The customer blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me," he scoffed. "Do you even work here?" The CEO didn't answer. Instead, he knelt down and picked up the fallen plate from the floor. Everyone watched in silence. The staff behind the counter stood frozen, unsure whether to intervene or stay back. The waitress tried to speak, her voice shaking, but the CEO gently motioned for her to stay calm. What no one in that diner knew was that this wasn't just about a rude customer or a spilled plate of food. The CEO had been running his company for over a decade, but recent complaints about how frontline workers were being treated by both customers and upper management had made him question if the company's values were still alive in the day-to-day operations. That's why he had chosen to go undercover, to see the truth for himself. And here it was. The young waitress, Emily, had only been working at the diner for 3 months. She took the job to help pay for her classes at the local community college. She had never expected anything fancy, just fair pay, respect, and maybe a kind word or two now and then. Today had already been rough. One of her coworkers called out sick, and she'd been handling double the tables. She hadn't even had time for lunch herself. And now this. The CEO looked around the diner, making eye contact with several customers. A few nodded slightly, silently agreeing that what had just happened wasn't right. Still, no one had stood up until now. That silence, he realized, was part of the problem. Back at the rude customer's table, the man was growing impatient. "Look, I don't know who you think you are, but I'm a paying customer. I don't come here to be lectured." The CEO remained quiet for a moment. Then, with calm but firm words, he replied, "You're right. You are a paying customer. But that doesn't give you the right to humiliate someone." Just then, a manager stepped out from the kitchen, clearly confused by the scene in front of him. He glanced between the customer, the waitress, and the older man in the polo shirt. And that's when things started to shift. Not just in the room, but in the entire story. The manager, Jason, walked over briskly, wiping his hands on his apron, still unaware of who the older man was. He gave the angry customer a forced smile, clearly trying to diffuse the tension before it escalated any further. "Is there a problem here, sir?" he asked, glancing awkwardly at Emily, who was still standing there, stunned and trying not to cry. The customer pointed aggressively at the waitress. "Yeah, the problem is your staff. She messed up my order and then gave me attitude. I want her written up or fired." Jason turned to Emily, concern flickering in his eyes, but he didn't speak right away. Emily had been one of his best workers. Reliable, polite, always the first to cover a shift. But now he was stuck, torn between siding with a paying customer or defending a young employee. It was the kind of moment restaurant managers face all too often, especially in a business where the customer is always right, gets thrown around like a rule rather than a phrase. Before Jason could respond, the CEO stepped in again. "I saw what happened. She didn't mess up. Your behavior was out of line," he said calmly. Jason shot him a confused glance. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to. Wait, who are you exactly?" For a second, the entire place held its breath. The CEO opened his wallet and quietly showed Jason a company ID, one with his photo and title printed clearly beneath his name. Jason's face went pale. His eyes darted from the ID to the CEO's calm face, then to the customer, who was now visibly nervous. Jason stepped back, lips parted, unsure of what to say. Emily's eyes widened, realizing that the quiet man who had been watching from the corner wasn't just some stranger. Whispers started to ripple through the diner as word spread. A few customers were now recording with their phones, sensing something big was happening. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, some of the staff had peeked out to see what the fuss was about. One of them, a dishwasher named Marco, leaned in toward a line cook and whispered, "That's him, right? The owner guy. The big boss." Outside the diner, a few curious passersby paused near the windows, drawn in by the frozen scene inside. The customer, now sweating, fumbled with his napkin. "Look, I didn't mean to cause trouble. I just had a bad morning." But it was too late for excuses. The CEO turned to Jason, voice still low but serious. "We need to talk. Privately, but not just about this. About everything." The tension in the room didn't fade. If anything, it deepened. Because the truth was, this moment wasn't just about one customer's temper. It was about something much bigger. And no one, not even the staff, was ready for what was coming next. Jason nodded silently, still shaken, and led the CEO through a side hallway to the small back office. The air was thick with tension. Emily watched them disappear, her heart pounding. She didn't know what to think. Part of her was terrified. Had she done something wrong without realizing it? Was she about to be dragged into something bigger than she could handle? Back in the office, Jason shut the door behind them. The CEO sat down slowly, scanning the cluttered desk, the outdated posters on the wall, the worn schedule tacked up with names scribbled in pen. It was a small space, but it told him a lot. This wasn't just a restaurant problem, it was a company-wide culture problem, and he was finally seeing it firsthand. "Jason," he said calmly, "how often does this kind of thing happen?" Jason hesitated. "Honestly, more than it should. We try to de-escalate things quickly, keep the customers happy, but sometimes it feels like the staff are the ones paying the price." The CDO nodded, his jaw tightening. "And how often do you hear about it from corporate?" Jason gave a bitter half-laugh. "Almost never." Meanwhile, out in the dining area, the atmosphere hadn't settled. The customer who started it all was still seated, now nervously fidgeting with his phone. A few other patrons shot him disgusted glances, while others whispered among themselves. Emily stood at the counter, trying to help other tables, but her hands were still shaking. She kept her head down, but her mind raced. In the kitchen, Marco turned to the line cook again. "You think he's gonna shut the place down?" he whispered. "This could be bad." The cook didn't answer. No one really knew what the CEO's next move would be, and that uncertainty was growing heavier by the second. Back in the office, the CEO leaned forward. "I built this company on the belief that everyone, no matter what role they have, deserves respect. Somewhere along the line, that got lost." Jason nodded quietly. "It's been hard to keep morale up. Staff turnover is high, and people are burnt out. Emily's one of the good ones. She didn't deserve that." The CEO stood up. "No one does." Footsteps echoed down the hallway as they made their way back toward the front. Every eye in the diner turned toward them. The customer sat up straighter, clearly trying to read the CEO's expression. Emily froze as the two men emerged. She felt like the world had gone quiet again. The CEO walked to the center of the room and looked around. He was about to speak, not just to the man who threw the food, but to everyone in the room. And what he said next would change everything. The CEO stood silently for a moment, letting the weight of the room settle around him. Everyone watched, barely breathing. Then he turned, not to the angry customer, but to Emily. "You've done nothing wrong," he said clearly. "You handled yourself with grace, even when someone treated you in a way no one ever should." Emily blinked, stunned, unsure if she was supposed to respond. Her voice caught in her throat, so she simply nodded, her eyes brimming. The CEO turned slowly to face the customer. "You're not banned because of a mistake. You're banned because we don't tolerate bullying, especially toward people who show up every day, work hard, and treat others with kindness." Guests echoed across the diner. A few customers applauded quietly. The man at the table turned red, about to argue, when a young girl suddenly stood up from a table near the back. "I saw the whole thing," she said, maybe 14 or 15 years old, holding her phone. "You didn't just throw food at her. You were yelling before your plate even hit the table." Her mother gently pulled her back down, whispering for her to stay out of it. But the girl didn't look away. People like her shouldn't be afraid to go to work. The customer stood up, muttering something under his breath, and stormed out, face buried in his phone, trying to avoid the cameras now aimed his way. The tension broke, but the air didn't feel lighter. It felt heavier, more serious. Something had shifted. And just when everyone thought the moment had peaked, a new voice spoke up, this time from behind the counter. "Sir," said a man in a black apron, stepping forward nervously. "There's something else you should know. It's not just this one time. We've been told not to report customer incidents unless someone gets physically hurt. Management says complaints make the location look bad." So we stopped talking. The room went quiet again. The CEO stared at him. "Who told you that?" The man hesitated, then pointed toward the back office. It wasn't Jason. It came from above him, regional management. They said customer experience ratings matter more than anything else. And we've been covering things up just to keep the peace. Jason looked blindsided. I didn't know it had gone that far. Another employee chimed in. There was a server last month who quit because a guy screamed at her for 10 minutes, and no one stepped in. She just walked out and never came back. The CEO's jaw tightened. What had started as a routine undercover visit was turning into something much deeper, an unraveling of a system that had protected bad behavior for too long. And in that moment, he realized this wasn't just about one diner, one waitress, or one outburst. It was a mirror reflecting a much bigger truth, and he wasn't leaving without facing it. The CEO stood in silence, taking in everything he'd just heard. His gaze swept across the room, the tired faces of the servers, the cautious expressions of the kitchen staff, the customers now fully aware that they'd been part of something much bigger than just a bad lunch hour. He'd come here to observe quietly, but what he had uncovered was impossible to ignore. This wasn't just a one-time mistake or a single angry customer. This was a pattern, one that had been quietly accepted for too long. He turned to Jason, who still looked stunned. This ends today, the CEO said firmly. No more protecting customer ratings at the cost of employee well-being. No more silence. Jason nodded slowly, the weight of responsibility finally catching up with him. Understood. The CEO stepped toward the counter, where Emily was still standing, unsure of what to do. You shouldn't have had to deal with that alone, he told her. From now on, no one here should ever feel unsafe or unsupported. Emily's voice finally returned, soft but steady. Thank you, she said, blinking back tears. Just then, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his face changed. He looked up, then down again, reading the message with growing disbelief. What is it? Jason asked. The CEO slowly handed over the phone. On the screen was a forwarded email from a regional manager, the same one the staff had accused of encouraging silence. It had been sent just 10 minutes ago, likely unaware the CEO was on site. It read, **** if today's incident gets out, shut it down. Offer hush money if needed. We can't afford another PR hit. ***. Jason's jaw dropped. Emily gasped. Even a few nearby customers caught the tone just by reading over his shoulder. Without a word, the CEO took the phone back and pressed forward. He added only one line. Effective immediately, your position is terminated. We don't protect cowards. Then he hit send. The room erupted in quiet murmurs. Some staff looked at each other with relief. A few even smiled, as if years of frustration had just been lifted off their shoulders. But just as the CEO was about to speak again, the front door opened. A woman stepped in, business attire, badge around her neck. She approached the CEO with purpose. Mr. Grayson, she said, sorry to interrupt. I'm from corporate legal. I need to speak with you. In private. He frowned. Legal? She nodded. It's about a whistleblower complaint filed this morning against you. The room froze again. And just like that, the story took another sharp turn. Because while the CEO had uncovered a broken system, he wasn't the only one being watched. The CEO's expression hardened for a moment, caught between disbelief and confusion. A complaint? He asked quietly, stepping aside with the corporate legal rep. The staff exchanged glances, tension rising once again. Just when they thought everything had finally turned around, the air had shifted again. In the corner of the diner, Emily watched nervously, unsure what this meant for her or anyone else. She had felt seen, finally heard, But now it seemed even the man who stood up for her was facing trouble of his own. In the small office once again, the legal rep lowered her voice. "The complaint isn't about today," she clarified. "It was filed months ago. Someone claimed your decision to go undercover bypassed legal protocols. Apparently, they felt it was a risk to employee privacy." The CEO exhaled slowly, nodding. "So it's political." She hesitated. "It looks that way. But after what you just exposed here, I don't think anyone's going to question your motives." Outside, the energy in the diner shifted again. Jason stepped up, speaking quietly to the staff, letting them know things would change. Not in weeks or months, but starting now. A new safety policy was being drafted. Staff would be trained on conflict resolution, but more importantly, they would have a real voice. No more staying silent out of fear of being written up or let go. The CEO returned, his face calm. He approached Emily one last time. "What happened here today matters. And it's not the end, it's the beginning of something better." She nodded, finally allowing herself a small smile. "Thank you for standing up for me." He glanced around the diner. "Thank you all for being honest." As he left the building, the same people who had been whispering now looked at him with something else in their eyes. Respect. Maybe even hope. He hadn't come to play the hero. But sometimes, leadership means listening when it's uncomfortable and taking action when no one else will. In the days that followed, the story of the undercover CEO went viral, not because of the outburst or the customer who caused it, but because of the response that followed. Articles praised the company's swift actions, and videos of the moment the CEO defended Emily gained millions of views. More importantly, company policy across all locations changed. Employee feedback was taken seriously, and people, workers and customers alike, were reminded that kindness should always come before convenience. As for Emily, she kept her job. In fact, she got a promotion. Not because of the incident, but because she showed strength when it mattered most. And somewhere out there, another customer was likely walking into a restaurant. But this time, things would be different, because one moment, one stand, had sparked a ripple across an entire company.